Thank you. First, I want to thank the Board of Visitors and General Walters for this incredible honor. When I gave this talk earlier today, something came to mind that I thought of as I was leaving the assembly. This is your day. This is about you. This is about the things you will do with the rest of your life, the foundations you've earned working through the last years here, earning an advanced degree. But it's critically important as you do that you remember the school's legacy. Even as a graduate program, there is a certain distinction about the Citadel that comes through in everything it does: honor, integrity, and ethics. And as I look back at my career, I look back at the things I did, the foundation for that was and has always been my family. However, that foundation was honed here at the Citadel. I learned how to live my life the right way. And today, I am not going to give you ethics lessons. I'm going to tell you about myself. And I hope that you will find your voice in your own stories. And hopefully mine will have some degree of interest for you. And I'll do my very best to tell you about me in a way that allows you to see how those stories and those activities and those endeavors hone the rest of my life. Before I begin telling you about my life, I have to contrast the end and the beginning. I was born, as General Walters said, in a small town, farming community on the banks of Lake Okeechobee. Until I was 14 years old, we had neither running water or electricity. However, I did have two parents, two brothers, and two sisters living in a house that could easily today fit in my garage. But in that house was a great deal of love, a great deal of affection. We didn't have a lot, but I wasn't poor. I was rich in the lessons my father and my family taught me about perseverance, about honor, about integrity, but most of all, about caring for each other. Because in this world, as you make your way, the one lesson you will invariably learn is it's extremely important to make friends along the way and care about each other. And one of the things that I had to learn early on in my life, as I grew up in Jim Crow South, was life was going to be difficult. My dad was my hero. My dad was a person who I looked to for everything. And he taught me an early lesson. He came out of Sumter, South Carolina, a farm kid during the Depression, had to leave school at 10 to join his family in the fields, never got a formal education, then was drafted into World War II, and later left South Carolina to move to Florida to farm sugarcane. In 47 years of working in those fields, my dad only missed 3 days of work. And those 3 days of work were because of illness and one day to bury my grandmother. I learned from my dad the value of perseverance. I remember one day our house caught on fire and my dad pulled down some curtains and burned his hand. That morning, my mom awakened me to come to their bedroom and she said, "Please tie your dad's shoe." And she was crying and my dad was having his hands bandaged. And this is the days before workers' comp or medical leave. If you didn't work, you didn't get paid. And when my mom asked my dad, "Why are you going to work that day?" he looked down at me and said, "If I don't work, who feeds him?" That is still the single most important lesson in my entire life. Who feeds him? And he talked about perseverance over and over again with me. He talked about the value of keeping your word. He talked about the value of working very hard. So when I joined Aetna in 1973, and I joined Aetna as a young man out of the Citadel, I really had those lessons as my guideposts for getting things done. And as I said earlier, the end of my life was different than my dad's. I managed the 13 Western states. We had medical contracts with 95% of hospitals and doctors in those states. We covered 1.2 million members, and we handled billions in revenue and earnings. And yet none of those lessons came from the Citadel or my dad on how to do that. It came from making friends along the way who taught me the business. It came from perseverance. It came from pushing myself to learn. It came from finding out how to get things done when you weren't sure what you were doing, when you weren't sure how to get it done. It also taught me the value of making and keeping good relationships, because the sum total of your success is going to be your internal and external relationship, because we can't do it alone. One of the things that I also found out about myself when I got to the Citadel came from my dad. I disliked this institution. I was not a happy Citadel cadet. However, my dad told me very early on, I can't afford college. So when the Citadel offered a scholarship, I said yes, never having heard of the school or never having been out of the state of Florida before, but I knew it was a way to get to college. Shortly after my visit at the Citadel, where I'd agreed to come as a cadet, I received a scholarship offer from Miami, my favorite school. I told my dad, oh, I'm in luck. I finally got the scholarship I wanted. And my dad says, no, you're not. You're going to the Citadel. When I asked why, he said, he gave your word. That meant everything to him. And as I grew up, I came to understand how critically important that meant. You gave your word. When I was at the Citadel, every night in that first year, I called my dad on the phone, begging him to send me money to come home. I was miserable. I was unhappy, and I didn't fit in. And when you think about Charleston in 1969 and 1970, it was 14 months after the death of Dr. King. It was in the middle of the civil rights structure. There were still places in town that wouldn't accept African Americans as guests or even as customers in some cases. You were not wanted. And that was the case in the barracks because, again, these kids were a product of the times. So I was really unhappy at being here. And so my dad would listen, and every time I'd tell my story, he'd listen very carefully and then hang the phone up. And I'd have to go back. And finally one day my dad said to me, okay, you can leave. I'll send you bus fare. Then he asked me a question. Where are you going? I said, I'm coming home. He says, not without a degree, you're not. He said, I sent you away to get a college education. I want you to come back with a degree. So I had no choice but to return to the Citadel. And at that moment, I really didn't understand what my dad was trying to impart. What he said to me later was quitting is always easier the second time around. And he wanted me to know that life was hard, but you can't just walk away when things get tough. That lesson was imparted to me again a few months later in my sophomore year when we played Clemson University. Now, as General Walters said, I was a fairly good athlete. In high school, I never lost a one-on-one battle. In college, I never faced anyone that I thought was better than I was. And in our first game of the year, we played Clemson. And I played fairly well in a close game, so I knew I could play at the college level. However, the second game was against Vanderbilt. And our coaching staff said to us, these guys are pretty good. They've got a good line, and particularly Norman, the tackle you're playing is a tough kid. Well, I was not afraid of tough kids because in my life, as I said earlier, I never lost a battle. Very first play, he drove me to the sideline. And for the next 3 quarters, he shoved me all over the field, and I couldn't do a thing about it. In the third quarter, the coaching staff mercifully took me out of the game. And I felt relieved. I was so thrilled to get out of that game because I had been beaten. But on the sideline, sitting there staring at that scoreboard, and the score was 52-0, I felt something else. An anger and sadness I had never felt before. And later flying home on a plane being pushed around the sky through a violent thunderstorm, I felt even more sadness because I finally realized what had happened. I didn't just get beat, I had quit. And that filled me with more resolve than I'd ever known before. And I swore on that flight that I may get beaten again by a tougher opponent, but I was never going to quit again, because I never wanted that feeling of having quit the fight in the middle of something that was so critically important to me. And I've tried to live that life or that motto the rest of my life. Sometimes life gets difficult, but perseverance and toughness is not the sign of, a macho human being. It's a sign of just pushing through those difficult moments. Several years later, when I joined Aetna, I was very happy in their group school program. And I thought I'd done well. I finished second in the class. But at the end of the training program, one of their senior officers said to me, "You know what, Norm? We didn't think you could do this." And then it hit me. They didn't just welcome me into the program. They welcomed me into the company because the law said so. But they didn't roll out a welcoming mat for me. And that drove me crazy. I said at that very moment, I could either quit or persevere. And for the next 47 years, to quote an old employer of mine, I showed up every day dressed to play to prove a point. One of the things that, I got out of this institution was a love of the Constitution. When I was growing up and living in the South, the Constitution was not a part of my life. You didn't teach young African-American men about a document that said they were included. It was just not done. But as a young man, I remember a young Jewish kid coming to my parents' door in 1966 and telling them about a very new law, the 65 Voting Rights Act. And he said, coupled with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, this law now gave you power. And I was shocked. A white man telling a black man in the South you had power. So I followed him for the rest of the day, asking questions about that law. And he instilled in me a love of the Constitution that was also honed here at the Citadel. When I got here, the football field was a place I felt safe. Not the dorms, not the barracks I should say, but the football field, because it was a meritocracy. The best player won. However, one day in the classroom, a professor, Dr. Larry Moreland, was standing in front of us telling us about the Constitution. And he couched it in terms of the civil rights struggle that Dr. King and others were fighting for, the same rights promised in that Constitution. Unfortunately, I hadn't seen it that way, and those in the class hadn't thought about it. But that day was the first day that anyone other than the coaching staff member had welcomed me into the institution. That day, I became a cadet. That's when I fell in love with the Constitution all over again. And for the rest of my life, including this trip here today, I never travel without that document in my possession, because I am in there. You just have to find it. We're having some incredible discussions today about voting rights, incredible discussions about limiting the power, of people to get to the polls. But it's critically important as you go about your life in the future, understanding the value of what you do, of how you live your lives, is also rooted in how you treat other people and the value you place on them and their existence. And I encourage you, when you go out there in your life and endeavor, make darn sure you live your life with ethics, and at the forefront of everything you do, think about the other person. When I joined Aetna and I started working for the company, I was the epitome of a businessman. My job was so important to me that I did it 24/7. I did my job because I thought that was my way of proving I was talented and successful, to the exclusion of everything else. Family became secondary. My wife reminds me over and over again that on vacation, I moved from one park bench to the other, carrying a BlackBerry and a cell phone, and dialing into a meeting or calling the office. But on July 4th, 2010, something happened. I was in the happiest place in the world, Disneyland. I stood up and collapsed onto the floor and I had what they call a complete spinal compression. I was paralyzed from the neck down, could not move a thing, and I was angry. This was not the life I had envisioned. And being in that hospital every day and not being able to take care of myself made me so angry, to the point where the nurses asked my wife, "Why is he so unhappy? Why won't let us help him?" And she said, "Because he's independent." That night, about 2 a.m., this nurse came to my room and she said to me, after I screamed at her to get out and leave me alone, she said, "I'm a nurse by choice. I'm here to help you. Let me take care of you. Get over yourself because we are trying to make you better." That conversation helped me to accept my condition. It helped me to accept help from others. It helped me to realize that we don't walk through this world alone. And during that time in the hospital, I was treated by the son of a single African-American mother who was my surgeon. I was treated by a young man from Mexico who was my chief protector, and he would pick me off the floor every time I fell. My therapists were an Asian young lady from San Francisco and a farm girl from Arizona. They became my family. They looked after me for 2 months. And there were days the pain was so bad, my hands would curl into a fist and I'd scream in agony, and they'd all tell me the same thing. "Take a moment, but we're going to do it again. And we're gonna keep doing it until you get out of that chair." And the doctor told my wife very candidly there was a very small chance I'd ever walk again, and even there was a good chance I might not survive because all the bone fragments from my spine were behind my spinal column, and it could separate at any moment, until they put a titanium rod in my neck and rebuilt my spinal column. But it left me with a problem. I'm in pain 24/7, and that pain never goes away. But it's a small price to pay to stand here today, to be alive. I left that hospital feeling very good about myself and my prospects for a job. My wife came to pick me up, and she brought with her 2 things that she had taken away: my BlackBerry and my cell phone. And she said, "I'm gonna remind you of something. When you went into the hospital, Aetna's stock price was $10 lower than it is today, and you never called in once. The next time we're with family on vacation and you've got to call the office, remember that." That changed my life. It changed my perspective. It made me keenly aware that you can walk through life experiencing it in small doses, or you can embrace it. And that embrace means making sure you make time for the people that matter. It also did one other thing for me. It taught me the value of friendships. It taught me the value of relationships. And when I recovered, I went back to work, but I told my manager at that time, I was tired of making a living. It was time to make a difference. And I would only take the job if I could do just that. So when I went back to work, I resolved to fix what I thought were problems in how we treated our employees, how we treated each other, but more importantly, how we lived our lives and did our jobs. During my 2 months at Cedars-Sinai, I came to understand that in all the years I had worked, so little of me was invested in the people that I worked with, their families, or their lives. I was a bottom line guy. I wanted to make my numbers. But at the end of the day, I started to make a difference. And that difference was getting to know my people, their families, and making sure that these people were well respected, but most of all appreciated. So when I came back to work rather, I changed how I did my job. I changed how I treated my team, and I quite frankly changed how they treated each other. I created a document that really changed how we behaved as a market and as a team. And if you give me a couple of moments, I will share with you what I did and why. One of the things I said to my team was this: the responsibility of a leader is to create an environment where results are rewarded. We are a group of people working in an office, working in an environment, working together to achieve a goal. However, that philosophy of work and responsibility also includes taking care of each other and taking care of your family. As everyone seeks their own self-interest in an interdependent world, a leader's role is to manage the unpredictability of change and the resulting stress it creates. Each environment is a community where our self-interest is connected to the welfare of others. Establishing a sense of equality is a hallmark of the happiest environments. I'm going to give you a couple of points that I would really have my team read every January to remind ourselves who we were. And one of those I stole from a good friend that I met years ago, Dr. Patrick Moynihan, who said, "Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. Do not fall in love with the sound of your own voice. When leaders stake out positions early in the process, it tends to stifle dissenting opinions. Create an environment where collaboration is encouraged and healthy discourse is cultivated. Do not sacrifice honor and integrity on the altar of success. People expect you to succeed ethically. Expect results. Performance matters. Create an environment where everyone feels safe. Employees will spend more time at work than any other place except home. Constantly challenge and examine stated positions. The world is an unpredictable environment where individuals must adjust in order to thrive. Listen to explanations, never accept excuses. You either met your plan or you didn't. Never feel you're the smartest person in the room. Everyone's contributions matter. Create an atmosphere where everyone is comfortable. Coming to work should not create stress. Embrace every challenge as an opportunity to improve performance. Never become paralyzed because of a fear of failure. It's a great learning tool. Understand that your success is related to the value of the internal and external relationships. Care as much about your people as you care about their work. Treat everyone fairly but not the same. Context and circumstances matter. And never forget the power of saying thank you. In closing, I would like to paraphrase one of my favorite people, Maya Angelou, who said, long after people forget what you said to them, what you did for them, they will remember how you made them feel. Today, I thank you for having an old man here, giving you your time and attention to, and making me feel welcome. Thank you very much.